Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to understand cyber stakeholders' responses to a catastrophic cyber attack on various critical infrastructure sectors such as energy, water, and healthcare. Additionally, this hearing will emphasize the role of cyber insurance in organizational preparedness and recovery, including what cyber insurance is, what it covers, and how to ensure it gives organizations confidence that they will not be alone at their most vulnerable moment. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Let's imagine some scenarios for our critical infrastructure. Our electrical grid goes down. Our hospitals are taken offline. Our water systems are shut down indefinitely. We are unable to make transactions. Each one of these scenarios is nothing short of catastrophic for our economy and for our national security interests, especially if we do not know how quickly they can be resolved. From healthcare to banking, we depend on each one of these sectors daily, such that it may seem unfathomable to have one of them go down. However, rapidly evolving tactics in cyberspace heighten the possibility of their recurrence each and every day. Recognizing the widespread damage that these events would cause, our public and private sectors must be prepared to respond quickly, effectively, and collaboratively. To do this, entities must know who to go to, how much of the damage they will be responsible for covering, and what assistance will be available to them. This will help them develop a proactive recovery plan before a major attack occurs, rather than scrambling when they are at their most vulnerable point. Given the nature of threats is changing and impacts vary, the cyber insurance industry is critical to determining how nimble we can respond. This is a challenge today because absent a major attack, our standards for coverage are still being defined. However, we should have hope. With clearer expectations for cyber insurance coverage, there is promise for mitigating risks to individual companies and broader society. For example, cyber insurance providers can help cover the financial costs of cyber attack much like any other form of insurance. We can also build off the work firms are already doing. Currently, many firms provide cyber analytics for covered companies and look for potential vulnerabilities in advance of a cyber attack. Some also provide legal defense for any compromised data, while others have best practices and recommendations for resiliency that they provide to clients. We are here today to dig into these issues by exploring a range of scenarios to think through the development of the standards. We must start with a basic understanding of what cyber insurance is and what is currently covered under a range of circumstances. This will inform our discussion about what should be covered. The U.S. government also plays a pivotal role in responding to major cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure. Private sector companies cannot be expected to handle the impact of nation-state attacks alone. Although we do not have our federal partners present today, I hope that we can have a robust discussion about existing federal mechanisms for incident response in a major attack. This will help us understand where our private sector partners might need more help and where we can strengthen and clarify our lines of communication with public-private partnerships. We have a unique opportunity to revisit incident response for critical infrastructure, given federal action that has unfolded in recent months. For example, as this subcommittee examined last month, CIS will begin work on the final CERCIA rule soon, which aims to create proactive federal standard for incident reporting. Additionally, the recent release of the National Security Memorandum 22 reaffirmed the 16 critical infrastructure sectors and has now kickstarted the rewrite of sector-specific plans for sector risk management agencies. These have not been updated for almost 10 years despite a dramatically different threat landscape. The new sector-specific plans will feed into CIS's development of the 2025 National Infrastructure Risk Management Plan. This hearing is a good opportunity to examine how the sector risk management agencies manage collective risk and how CISA executes its role as national coordinator. I want to thank our witnesses for being here to help us understand the complex cyber threat landscape against our critical infrastructure sectors and how the cyber ecosystem, government owners and operators, insurance providers, and others can improve their coordination and collaboration. My goal is for us to leave this hearing with a better grasp of what is working well among these partners and where we need to improve our relationships and response processes. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman, and this is quite timely of a hearing, and in fact, too often quite prescient, because we'll hold a hearing on an issue and then we'll realize in a couple months that we were really just circling the target as far as what we are vulnerable to. And that's really a credit, I think, to the chairman and his team and his members, and also our team and our colleagues who have, for the last, 20 months, really been aligned in taking on this threat. I also want to welcome, and I want to welcome all of you as witnesses, but particularly Jack Kudale from Cowbell Insurance. Cowbell is headquartered in Pleasanton, California, which is in the heart of my congressional district. And as you will learn, they are insuring small and medium-sized businesses up to approximately $250 million in revenue. And that's who the chairman and I, as we talk about cyber, that's who we worry about the most, are the small and medium-sized businesses, because look, the giants, we want to make sure that they're taken care of and there's cyber hygiene, awareness, staff, but the giants often are going to have a CISO and a full team and outside consultants and advisors, but it's really small and medium-sized businesses who are also bolted on to so much of critical infrastructure that they don't. And having folks like Cowbell and just this emerging insurance industry helping them understand the risk, price the risk, and then backstop the risk is really important. So I look forward to that conversation. According to the FBI's IC3, cybercrime cost Americans $12.5 billion in 2023, which was a 20% increase in losses from 2022, and we expect it will only go up in this coming year. They've reported that 40% of ransomware attacks in 2023 targeted critical infrastructure, making cyber attacks not only expensive, but potentially disruptive. That's also in part why I support what the chairman was referencing in undoing the SEC reporting rule and making it more, I would say, adaptive to the real-life, real-time decisions that folks have to make to decide if they're undergoing a cyber attack or if they are just experiencing a software upgrade issue. But we don't want them spending too much time with lawyers and not enough time with cyber professionals as they take on and try and understand what is hitting them. Fortunately, on most realms, the Biden administration is leading a range of efforts to bring the unique capabilities of government and the private sector together in new ways to confront emerging cyber threats. They've laid out, as you've heard in this committee over and over, the National Cybersecurity Strategy and three important initiatives relevant to this hearing of that strategy is stabilizing the insurance market, maturing operational collaboration, and improving our ability to understand the cascading effects of cyber attacks so we can mitigate the impacts and respond more dynamically. Cyber insurance policies have long served as a non-regulatory way to incentivize the adoption of cybersecurity controls and blunt the losses of cyber attacks that overcome network defenses. I've heard from Jack and others that in this industry, this early in its evolution, the most successful companies are not the companies that have the most policyholders because it's still too difficult to price the risk. And they seek to do that in their endeavors. But what we can do here in government, left of boom, left of an attack, is to better help create standards and incentives and perhaps grant programs and tax deductions to help small and medium-sized businesses protect themselves left of boom so that we can have a broader insurance market that protects all of us. But increases in the frequency of attacks and sophistication have cost cyber incidents, along with the lack of historical data, lack of models to accurately assess risks, and lack of consistency in terminology and coverage have created a lot of friction in the cyber insurance market. These dynamics have created a perfect storm. Demand for cyber insurance has increased, premiums have gone up, and some insurers are reluctant to write new policies. So we are in a unique position to bring certainty and stability to the market, and I'm glad that the Biden administration is seeking to do that. Notably, the administration has prioritized identifying ways the federal government can help address gaps in the cyber insurance market, particularly related to coverage for catastrophic cyber incidents. The administration is 2 years into assessing the need for and potential structures of a federal backstop to a catastrophic cyber event. And I look at this somewhat in the same framework of the terrorism reinsurance project, TRIA, that we have funded in years past. Without government intervention, we run the risk of cyber insurers being overextended when a catastrophic cyber incident occurs, or writing policies that include so many exemptions that no one can make a claim. The Biden administration has also relaunched the Cyber Insurance and Data Analysis Working Group, CDOG, not a rap or hip hop band, but a Biden administration policy. Would also probably be a cool rap or hip hop band.
You can do it.
Yeah, exactly, in another life. At CISA, CDOG helps insurers better analyze risk by identifying the security controls that are most effective and improving access to data. Enhancing our ability to evaluate risk will help the cyber insurance market at every level, making cyber insurance more attractive and accessible. Ultimately, higher rates of cyber insurance uptake will reduce systemic risk and yield dividends in resilience. I'm looking forward to our witnesses' perspectives on what more the federal government could be doing to strengthen the cyber insurance market. And I was encouraged that the National Security Memorandum 22 recommitted the administration to building operational collaboration. So very much look forward to this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and I'll turn it back to you so we can hear from our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you very much. Please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Frank Cilluffo currently serves as the director of the McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security. Cilluffo was a member of the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission and served on the Department of Homeland Security's Advisory Council, where he chaired various initiatives on counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and economic security. He then joined the George Washington University in 2003. I was there at the same time, establishing the Center for Cyber and Homeland Security as a prominent nonpartisan think tank.
But he probably only did it in 4 years.
Yeah, all right. As a prominent nonpartisan think and do tank, dedicated to building bridges between theory and practice to advance U.S. security. He served as Associate Vice President at GW, where he led a number of national security and cybersecurity policy and research initiatives. He directed the Center for Cyber and Homeland Security, and with the School of Business, launched the university's World Executive MBA in Cybersecurity program. Prior to his White House appointment, Mr. Cilluffo spent 8 years in senior policy positions with the Center for Strategic and International Studies at a Washington-based think tank. He currently also serves as trustee for the Alabama School of Cyber Technology and Engineering and is chairman of the Advisory Board of Cyber Florida. Mr. Matthew McCabe is the managing director of cyber broking, Guy Carpenter. Mr. McCabe came to Guy Carpenter from Cilluffo Consulting, Inc., a provider of cybersecurity and cyber incident response services specializing in ransomware. At Kivu, he acted as general counsel and advised on response, ransomware negotiation, and mitigation. Prior to Kivu, he worked as a senior vice president and assistant general counsel for cyber policy at Marsh's Cyber Center of Excellence, where he advised global clients with placement of cyber insurance, negotiation of coverage, wording, and the administering of cyber insurance claims. Prior to his career in cyber insurance, Mr. McCabe served as senior counsel of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security, where he advised congressional representatives on cybersecurity and data privacy issues in the administration of President George W. Bush as a policy director on the Homeland Security Council. Before working in Washington, he was a litigator at a law firm in New York, I wasn't going that name, specializing in securities and accounting fraud, and a law clerk for the Honorable William H. Pauley III in the Southern District of New York. Ms. Kimberly Denbow is Vice President of Security and Operations at the American Gas Association. She's also the Executive Director of the Downstream Natural Gas Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Over the course of her 27 years with AGA, she has served as staff executive for multiple AGA technical committees covering security, safety, gas control, underground storage, field operations, environment, and supplemental gas. At present, she leads the AGA Board Safety and Security Committee and the AGA Cybersecurity Strategy and Regulatory Action Committee. She serves as the industry liaison to numerous U.S. Department of Homeland Security and Department of Energy, natural gas, physical, and cybersecurity programs. Ms. Denbow is an active member of the Oil and Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council, where she stood up and co-chairs the Cybersecurity Work Group. Mr. Jack Kudale is the founder and CEO of Cowbell, the industry's first AI-powered cyber insurance provider that aims to make cyber insurance accessible to all businesses. He brings 25 years of business experience, having led 3 venture-backed Silicon Valley cybersecurity and data analytics startups after a long stint as an executive in charge of distribution at a Fortune 500 software company. He's a frequent speaker at industry events covering topics such as the future of cyber insurance and the use of AI and technology to enable continuous underwriting for cyber. He was recently named Entrepreneur of the Year Bay Area Award winner by Ernst & Young, a highly coveted award that honors entrepreneurs whose ambition, courage, and ingenuity have driven their company's success. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. I now recognize Mr. Cilluffo for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
The cyber threat continues to grow in scale, scope, and complexity, with nation-state actors, cyber criminals, and other malicious entities creating significant risk to our national security, economic prosperity, and public safety. If there's a conflict brewing somewhere, rest assured there's a cyber element to it. Cyber capabilities have become integral to modern warfare strategy and doctrine, whether through computer network attack, computer network exploit, or espionage, intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or disinformation and misinformation to expand the fog of war. While threats come in various shapes, sizes, and forms, the People's Republic of China tops the list as an existential threat to U.S. networks. Chinese state-sponsored actors like Volt Typhoon have demonstrated their intent to shift from espionage to pre-positioning in a concerning escalation. Volt Typhoon has been particularly active in targeting American facilities in Guam, a strategically important U.S. territory in the Pacific. It has compromised organizations across various critical infrastructure sectors and is living off the so-called land. Beyond direct nation-state threats, countries are increasingly turning to proxies to conduct cyber operations, allowing nation-states to mask their identity and maintain plausible deniability. This blurs the line between state-sponsored activities and cybercrime, making both attribution and response more challenging. Russia, for example, has become a safe haven for ransomware gangs, complicating any effort to combat them. Ransomware is hitting epidemic proportions, as we know, putting a target on everyone's back and impacting organizations of all sizes across every sector of our economy and society. The landscape is rapidly evolving. Our approaches to cybersecurity must evolve too. The increasing sophistication, the expanding attack surface, and impact of cyber threats demand a reimagining of our defense strategies, particularly public-private partnerships. To date, our cybersecurity posture has largely been reactive, responding to incidents, putting out fires. This is unsustainable, and we can no longer simply firewall our way out of the problem. We must recalibrate and shift toward a more proactive, collaborative approaches that leverage the full spectrum of national capabilities. This includes identifying and protecting systemically important entities, or SIEs, whose compromise could have significant cascading effects on our security and stability. National Security Memorandum 22, promulgated earlier this year, introduced the concept of SIEs. And while I applaud the guidance writ large, one significant shortcoming was not designating space systems, which underpin a wide range of critical services as a critical infrastructure sector. Robust public-private partnerships are essential to secure SIEs. Government and industry must actively collaborate to secure these entities. And to turbocharge this effort, we need to move beyond the traditional information sharing approach and into a joint threat analysis, coordinated incident response, and shared responsibility for risk mitigation. The Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC, represents a strong model, but it needs to scale. We also need to launch sector-specific approaches that address unique challenges and needs. Project Fortress from U.S. Treasury is a promising example of government and industry sitting side by side in the same foxhole, moving beyond defense to include possible offensive capabilities. We must not lose sight of the backbone of our economy, as I think Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, you both brought up. The backbone is small and medium-sized businesses, and any solutions should allow them to both benefit from and contribute to our collective defense. Exploring innovative models for risk sharing, such as new insurance frameworks and government backstops for catastrophic incidents, is crucial. The cyber insurance market is beginning to stabilize, but nation-state threats often exceed the scope of traditional policies, creating a coverage gap that leaves many organizations vulnerable in instances of war, significant nation-state actors, and attacks on critical infrastructure. While insurers can and must incentivize better security practices, market forces alone are unlikely to fully address the full spectrum of risk. Developing a cyber insurance framework similar to the TRIA, Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, could provide a solution, but only if government intervention is carefully designed to complement private sector efforts, not replace them. As we move forward, striking the right balance between government involvement and private sector innovation is vital. We must be careful not to stifle growth, innovation, or cause moral hazard while providing the necessary support for catastrophic risk. In conclusion, the threat landscape demands a bold, collaborative, and adaptive response. After all, how many businesses, even the biggest, went into business thinking they had to defend themselves against foreign militaries and foreign intelligence services? Yet that is precisely the challenge our critical infrastructure operators today face. This asymmetry demands new models. By leveling up collaboration and translating nouns into verbs between government and industry, developing sector-specific approaches, and exploring innovative models for risk sharing, we can effectively mitigate the risk of catastrophic cyber incidents and safeguard our critical infrastructure. Sorry for going over, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, that's not bad. In the conclusion, that was a long in conclusion. All right, it's an important topic. So
I've got the vowel at the end of my name.
Good. I know, that's why I let you keep going. Thank you, Mrs. Cilluffo. I now recognize Mr. McCabe for five minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and Congressman Luttrell, thank you very much. My name is Matthew McCabe. I'm a Managing Director and Cyber Reinsurance Broker at Marsh McLennan. Marsh McLennan is a leading professional services firm advising clients across 130 countries. We help these clients navigate complex challenges through 4 market-leading businesses: Marsh, Guy Carpenter, Mercer, and Oliver Wyman. These challenges include developing cyber risk strategies for clients of all sizes and across all sectors of industry. Often this involves measuring exposure to cybersecurity incidents and the placement of cyber insurance or reinsurance. Marsh McLennan introduced some of the very first insurance policies that address data privacy and cyber risk. My comments today focus on cyber threats to critical infrastructure and the roles that industry and government can play in building cyber resilience against catastrophic attacks. The cyber threat to critical infrastructure is undeniable. We referenced the Volt Typhoon attack, and in the Joint Cybersecurity Advisory about that threat, the agencies warned that nation-state threat actors were pre-positioning themselves already on IT networks to enable lateral movement and to disrupt functions. Just last year, the FBI tallied 193 complaints of ransomware from companies that operate critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure companies encounter this threat every day. Increasingly, cyber insurance serves as an essential component for mitigating that risk. First, the underwriting of insurance serves as an annual assessment of security by an objective third party. And that assessment receives scoring in economic terms through either premiums or terms of coverage. Second, cyber insurers use risk engineering to monitor the level of cyber hygiene maintained by their insureds. Third, cyber insurance provides incident response planning services. These expert services empower organizations to navigate through ransomware events, data breaches, and other cyber incidents. This aspect is especially valuable to thousands of small and mid-sized businesses that have encountered cyber incidents. Lastly, cyber insurance fulfills the critical role of helping organizations manage capital through the transfer of financial risk. For these reasons, insurance is an increasingly vital component of cyber risk management, although uptake varies by company size. 47% of Marsh clients with annual revenues greater than $1 billion purchase cyber insurance. That compares with 34% of clients with annual revenues of less than $1 billion. However, there are some cyber events, whether carried out by a nation state or a criminal threat actor, that could disrupt U.S. infrastructure so severely that the insurance industry cannot accept the magnitude of the losses. Such an event could have global economic impact and overwhelm insurers. It is difficult to quantify the delta between the ceiling for a catastrophic cyber event and the current limits of cyber insurance. The Global Federation of Insurance Associations estimates that this protection gap may be as high as $900 billion. There are now discussions regarding the potential benefit of a public-private partnership for catastrophic cyber risk, where the government would become the reinsurer of last resort if a cyber event resulted in losses deemed too large for the insurance industry to absorb. Last year's National Cybersecurity Strategy recognized when catastrophic cyber incidents occur, it is government's responsibility to stabilize the economy and provide certainty in uncertain times. Structuring that response before a catastrophic event occurs, rather than rushing to develop an aid package after the fact, could provide certainty to markets and make the nation more resilient. Federal support has precedent with other risks such as nuclear, terrorism, and flood. This committee should also consider a targeted option that takes a sector-specific approach, such as the energy sector. The committee could examine which sectors of critical infrastructure have the greatest need for a federal backstop. If we start preparing now, we can bend the risk curve for catastrophic cyber events. Insurance creates the right economic incentives to drive changes in society. Analyzing this issue now and leveraging the benefits of risk management will help build a more resilient U.S. economy. I appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective on cyber threat and how insurance works to mitigate that risk and enhance resilience, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. I now recognize Ms. Denbow for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Hello? How's that? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and Congressman Luttrell. I'm Kimberly Denbow, Vice President of Security and Operations at the American Gas Association, AGA. AGA represents more than 200 local energy companies that deliver clean and affordable natural gas to 96% of natural gas customers in the United States. I have led AGA's security policy and technical program for nearly 3 decades. Of particular interest here, I authored comments on behalf of AGA in response to the Federal Insurance Office's potential federal insurance response to catastrophic cyber incidents. Thank you for inviting me here today to this hearing to share the natural gas utility perspective. Safety and security are core values for America's natural gas utilities, which are countering the cyber threat daily through a diverse portfolio of tools that include cybersecurity insurance, a variety of cybersecurity enhancement and information sharing programs, natural gas system operational resilience, and public-private partnership opportunities. With respect to cyber insurance and from the natural gas utilities experience, the number of insurance providers willing to write cyber insurance policies has been limited. While capacity appears to be improving, actuarial data in the industry continues to be in short supply and is limiting the scope of coverage. The terms of exclusions vary widely and are difficult for many operators, particularly smaller ones, to understand what is covered and where important limiting coverage terms are in policy definitions. Owner-operators would benefit from standardized cyber insurance policy language, definitions, and applications that are simpler and more streamlined. Further, AGA members support a federal backstop for cyber insurance. AGA members continually work with federal government partners and regulators to promote risk-based cybersecurity programs that support attainable, sustainable, and auditable security measures. On the regulatory front, this is best represented by our work with the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. TSA continues to coordinate with pipeline owner-operators to improve risk-based cybersecurity requirements and achieve predetermined cybersecurity outcomes, all the while promoting flexibility to strengthen and add value to the pipeline security directives. On the voluntary front, the pipeline effort of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, JCDC, is an exemplary model of convening diverse communities of government, natural gas pipeline owner-operators, and industrial control system vendors to solve the tougher pipeline sector cybersecurity challenges. Before I close, I would be remiss if I did not draw your attention to a leading topic that continues to impair trust between owners and operators and our government. This topic is sensitive information protection. This is best depicted by the recent CISA Chemical Security Assessment Tool cybersecurity breach and the failure of the federal government to protect owner-operator sensitive operational information. We are talking about security and operational resilience. In this case, the government dropped the ball. There must be government accountability in the collection, aggregation, and protection of critical infrastructure-sensitive operational information. It is insufficient for agencies to express regret while operators are left to bear the brunt of the consequences. In closing, AGA member utilities combat the evolving cyber threat daily by leveraging a diverse cybersecurity management portfolio. Cyber insurance stakeholders benefit from standardized cyber insurance policy language, definitions, and applications. AGA encourages the government to learn from the successes of TSA and the JCDC in their genuine collaboration with owner-operators. And lastly, the federal government should hold itself to comparable, if not higher, standards for the protection of aggregated sensitive critical infrastructure information. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I look forward to the exchange.
Thank you, Ms. Denbow. I now recognize Mr. Kudale for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Sawell, and Congressman Luttrell, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on cyber resiliency in the case of a major cyber event. In 2019, I founded Cowbell, a cyber insurance provider using artificial intelligence headquartered in Pleasanton, California. Over the last 5 years, Cowbell has scaled from a small insurtech to a leading provider of cyber insurance for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. While we are first and foremost a cyber insurer, we take an active role in helping our policyholders decrease their cyber risk exposure by sharing our cybersecurity tools and expertise with them. Our continuous risk assessment of both our policyholders and the aggregate SME market provides us with best-in-class understanding and knowledge to mitigate and prevent potential loss. SMEs are one of the most underserved segments of the American economy when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber insurance. Any meaningful discussion surrounding the security of our critical infrastructure requires an understanding of the SME ecosystem. This segment represents over 99% of all businesses, 40% of the American GDP, and a potential major propagator of a widespread cyber contagion. SMEs also have the most to gain from basic cybersecurity measures. They hold the potential to either aggregate or extinguish a cyber catastrophe at scale via the most simple types of exploitations or software and hardware updates. Now, this is due to both the size and level of digital connectivity of the average SME. Unsophisticated types of vulnerabilities can aggregate simply due to lack of basic awareness and security. Furthermore, an attack on an unsophisticated market poses indirect threats to every entity in the cyber ecosystem. Currently, 4 out of 5 SMEs in the US are either uninsured or underinsured when it comes to cyber insurance. Awareness, education, and standardization of cybersecurity hygiene are still lacking, most often in the small business segment and particularly in the uninsured market. Additionally, awareness without sufficient guidance does not lead to appropriate action. In 2022, a survey on small business cybersecurity trends highlighted that 51% of small businesses did not have any cybersecurity measures in place, and that 59% of those businesses considered themselves too small to be targeted. Cowbell teams have found notable differences in the cybersecurity hygiene of the average uninsured or first-time buyer of insurance to that of the insured market. Now, this poses a compounding aggregation potential. The most uninsured entities are the most overexposed. It also outlines a broader truth regarding insurance gaps. Those with the least to lose stand to lose the most in the event of a cyber catastrophic event. Now, market growth projections for the SME cyber have not kept pace with the larger corporations. Now, this is outlined by the World Economic Forum's Cybersecurity Outlook, demonstrating that while more high-revenue companies are maturing into leaders of cyber resilience, more low-revenue organizations are losing overall cyber resiliency than gaining it. Overall, Cowbell and cyber insurance providers alike have unique visibility into the downstream impact of cyber incidents, where cyber meets financial, human, and physical consequences. Cowbell especially gains such visibility when working with secondary victims of supply chain attacks, which are increasing in number and seek to damage an organization and its customers through the single breach of one entity. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions and our continued conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Kudale. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. Additional round of question may be called after all members have been recognized. To start, I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Ms. Denbow, in your opening remarks, if I picked up correctly, the United States government is at fault for. Can you elaborate or expand on that statement, just so I know exactly where we're sitting today?
Yes, sir. So the Department of Homeland Security Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards is implemented by, at this point, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. When CFATS, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards, was first released, those companies that held large quantities of chemicals, which are considered chemicals of interest, Appendix A, had to submit top screen analyses, and in addition to that, security vulnerability assessments, as well as other sensitive information about their operations, chemical quantities, where they're located, how they are used, and whatnot. The database that contains that information was breached last year in so many ways, and other than the fact that it was very disturbing that owner-operators learned about that breach months later through the media rather than through the government, we recently were informed that though there has been no demonstration or evidence that information was exfiltrated from the database, that the database was accessed for 3 days, which means that there is every opportunity that screenshots or other ways that information, sensitive operational information of our chemicals from across the United States were accessible. And so this is where I say the government is trying very hard to get a better handle on what needs to be secured. And I will say, let me step back and say, the CFATS program has been phenomenal. They have done a great job in improving our nation's chemical security. But this goes to the part of protecting the sensitive information. And it seems every government entity and the sister entities all want to have access to operations sensitive information for one form or another. And thought needs to be given to how that is going to be protected. And there needs to be a transparency with the owner operator of the information if that information is compromised in any way.
Communication is always a huge deal when you're dealing with siloed entities. Case in point, SMEs across the board are very closed off. I think the ability for us to operate between the seams, if you will, in order to communicate properly if we had an attack, or sharing information back and forth with each other on, hey, this is the inevitable result of the attack, don't let this happen to you, is, I think, something that we're inevitably working on daily around here, and everybody's so close hold with their data information, whether or not it's retrospective, prospective, aggregated data, where it lives and breathes. I'll never vouch for, well, I'm being careful how I say this. I don't think anybody's completely protected from any sort of attack whatsoever where we sit today. But thank you for clarification on that. So sector-specific data or cyber insurance, and I'm going to toss this one out to the bunch. Anybody grab a hold of it if you want to. If we want a public-private and a government relationship, and the government to come in and backfill when necessary, if necessary, what does that look like? Because when we're talking about cybersecurity and cyberspace, inevitably a cyber attack can be a grid hit, it can be a agricultural hit, or it can, inevitably it can be life or death. So how, on this committee, how do we're on the receiving end of this, we're all ears here, okay, because you're the subject matter experts. But if we're gonna play this out, and believe me, I gotta pay insurance bills all the time, but it's very laid out specifically on, hey, here's what it is, and here's how we're gonna do this. But we, in the metaverse, in the cyberspace, risk and threat, it changes every half second of every minute, of every hour, of every day. How do we build the proper foundation and move forward? So we on this committee and in the House can understand that and then provide the support needed. And I'm tossing that out to the group.
I'm happy to jump on that. So it's got to be done collaboratively with industry. There's a lot of different elements to it. Number one, industry doesn't speak with one voice. There's going to be all sorts of insurance voices and opinions given on it. I think that there's going to be some very crucial elements, like for the cyber incident, that it shouldn't have a requirement of attribution by the federal government, so it's too hard. I think it should be determined by impact, and that's the overall size of the loss. I think that impact is going to either be set on a percentage level of losses of 300% of an insurer's book, or perhaps a fixed dollar number, but that's going to be a conversation back and forth. We submitted a response to an RFI where we threw out a suggested number where negotiations could begin, and we put it around the 1 in 250-year event. When I say we, I mean my company, Marsh McLennan. Put around the overall impact of a 250-year event to just show the magnitude that would have to be for the federal backstop to kick in. I think it should be voluntary because I don't think that every insurance company is necessarily going to want to participate, and that's a key distinction from TRIA, that TRIA responded to a very specific problem, and we're talking about building resilience here proactively, and I think that it shouldn't be compulsory to force companies into it, but I think there's a lot of interest out there. And my last point I think I would address is that trying to do the entire industry at one time might be just too big of a bit to chew. So I would approach sector specifics, and I think the energy sector is a perfect one where you have a very cohesive sector that interact with one another, who are already very highly regulated.
If we do start with that, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, for going over, if we do start with that, in the energy sector, I'm not going to say I disagree or agree with you. Remember, we represent 800,000 people with hundreds of thousands of companies across the nation. There's going to be somebody that's going to argue with that statement.
That's
So
fine.
imagine what, on the receiving end up here, we got to wade through all this. So it's going to be the collective group coming together for a stepping off point. But I'm sorry to close you off, sir. I'm 2 minutes over, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ranking Member, Mrs. Swalwell, for 5 minutes of question.
Mr. Luttrell, do you want some time?
Mine, sir? Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, please, sir. You continue with your closing.
I would just say for those sectors that are going to come back and say, I don't understand why they're first, I would say all are welcome at the table. I'm just naming a sector that I think it particularly fits for, but if financial institutions come forward and say, that's as important it is for us that it is for them, by all means, those discussions.
This is where the, and I hate to say the masses, but this is where the independent agencies and companies are going to have to come together and really position themselves in order to address the government on the way forward. And I may be speaking out of turn here, but just if you just can kind of play out everything that happens in the continental United States that we're talking about here, which every single, I mean, think about it. Everybody has an iPhone in their pocket. Everything is digital today. Everything is touched by the cyberspace. So if this is something that we really want to expand on, which we do, we wouldn't be having this hearing for otherwise. You're going to have to help us.
We are here to help.
Okay. Thank you. Ranking Member.
Yeah.
Mrs. Swalwell?
Mr. Kudale, in your testimony, you observed that 80% of small and medium-sized businesses lack cyber insurance and are overexposed, and that 59% of small businesses consider themselves too small to be targeted. Startling statistics that you cited for us. But at the same time, I understand that small businesses may find implementing baseline cybersecurity controls too expensive and may be overwhelmed navigating the cyber insurance market, particularly if we don't get this SEC rule right on like what the reporting is. That could also bog them down. What more should the government be doing to educate small businesses about cyber risks and incentivize implementation of baseline cybersecurity controls?
Ranking members, I will thank you for the question. It's first and foremost, just us being here. This is a great step. This hearing itself is a big event for us to express and educate the general public about what's happening in cyber insurance market. Second, in my written testimony, I recommended a three-step process when it comes to SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. And I'll just read out the first one out of my written testimony. And that's classification of SMEs as a subset of any cyber preparedness measures. Right? Too often, the focus is all on large enterprises and corporations. And so this is the second thing we can do. Third, education is the most critical when it comes to SME market and cybersecurity. Right? All it takes is one individual to make that organization successful by not clicking on some random link. All it takes is one person to take that entire organization down. And it is a business-ending event for small businesses. And so cybersecurity awareness training is where most of the focus is for SMEs, and a public-private partnership. If I have to point my finger on one thing, is the cybersecurity awareness training, incentives, government, private universities, whatever it takes, right? Being able to educate those 33.5 million businesses, that is 44% of our nation's GDP, it's mission critical for us to focus on education regarding cybersecurity.
Is the government doing enough to work with insurers to help standardize policy coverage and terminology? And should we standardize coverage and terminology? Or as Mr. Luttrell alluded to, do we need to be mindful of kind of the sector by sector, industry by industry, critical infrastructure versus non-critical infrastructure type of complexity there?
We do, and yes, it's not a straightforward yes or no answer. Cyber is a very technical, it's an emerging technical risk. It's unlike any other insurance line. In fact, it's the only other line outside of life insurance that's organically growing. In every other insurance line, you ought to replace another insurance policy. And being nature, it's an evolving risk. Coverages has to be innovated. You know, over the last 10 years, the terminology and coverages have been evolving, and we're still not there. Okay? So by putting limitation and standardization, it might hurt how nimble we are. Our purchasers really like a custom coverage that insurance companies put together for their needs, especially when there are new threats that are evolving every second, every hour, every day, right? At the same time, there are areas where we would love to see some standardization, war-related exclusions. That is, varieties exist in the marketplace today. And so there are certain areas we can improve on standardization, but this is an emerging technical risk. We got to innovate in this market, and coverages terminology plays a very important role. Until the time it matures, 4 out of 5 small businesses do not have cyber insurance. That is 80% market you just mentioned as well. And that's a tough one if there is to achieve that type of standardization in a current present time.
And I think when you were referencing life insurance and the comparison, were you saying that every other type of insurance is essentially compulsory, that you have to purchase it, like legally, auto insurance or homeowners insurance, or depending on what sector you work in, like malpractice insurance, but it's cyber and life are the only two that are not required?
That's correct. That's exactly what I meant. Is in every other line of insurance, there is a mandate, there is a requirement, there is an obligation. Not so much in cyber insurance. And yes, there are places, large corporations are mandating their supply chain partners. Government contracts are mandating their contractors to have cyber insurance policy. But there is no uniform mandate for cyber insurance like an auto policy or a home insurance.
Right. Thank you again. Mr. Kudale, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cilluffo, I'd like to start with you, please. In your written testimony, you stressed the importance of identifying and protecting systemically important entities. You said you would like to see this coordination go beyond information sharing and see entities engage in joint threat analysis and incident response coordination. What do you think, if any, are the inhibitors to entities engaging in these kinds of activities and getting beyond that information sharing stage?
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and that's an excellent question. I think just like any other environment, trust really is the coin of the realm. It takes a very long time to build, and it can evaporate in a nanosecond with one silly comment or one leak or what have you. So I think it really does come down to trust and also being honest enough to know where one's strengths are and where one's weaknesses are. So I make the case that the information sharing sets of discussions, they're all important, but they're tired. Maybe I'm just old and grumpy. I've been at this issue a long time. But I kind of feel like we have to go beyond all of that. And the only way you really go beyond that is if you play ball together and you're actually going to start hunting together. You're actually going to feel the pain together and you're actually going to respond together. So I think, to me, that's where we need to go. All that said and done, trust is still going to be. You don't want to necessarily, if you're a company and you have intellectual property, or if you have PII data that could be leaked in one way or another, obviously that comes with consequences. So you want to make sure that you minimize those to the greatest extent possible.
And do you have any thoughts on how we might do that? Anything that you would recommend or think we should be considering and how we could build that trust?
Yeah, I think the JCDC is a starting point, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative out of CISA. I think it needs to be scaled. The good thing about JCDC, if there's a crisis, they come together well. So when something is going boom in the middle of the night, or might go boom tomorrow, they are able to galvanize and rally the troops. The problem is that doesn't have sustainability in a day-to-day environment. So we got to figure out how to be able to transcend some of that. In my testimony, I touched on Project Fortress, which is a new initiative. It's led by Department of Treasury, financial services sector, and then they have publicly stated that it's not only going to be a reactive defensive set of issues, but you can turn to other tools that Treasury has, such as OFAC, and where they can start looking at unique ways to be able to put some pain on some of our adversaries. Because quite honestly, we're never going to defend our way out of this problem. We're going to have the same discussion in 10 years if that's all we do.
And Ms. Denbow, you mentioned both in your written testimony and in your earlier discussion with Mr. Luttrell, the CFATS program. And so I know on this subcommittee, we're very committed to trying to get that legislation passed. But right now, since it has not, I'd like to hear a little bit more from you. First, let's start with what are the benefits of the program and what do you find to be useful about it?
Well, I will tell you that the program sets a foundation for operators to work from. And one of the biggest values of the program, when the program first came out, I was around when the program first came out, and it was a very different model than what it is now. And it has actually migrated to a model that is extremely functional, where we talked about trust. Trust cannot be mandated. Trust must be earned, and that requires an investment of resources on both sides, the operator and the government partner or the government regulator. Regardless, that's how we in the pipeline with the pipelines are achieving what we're achieving with TSA. It's that trust. And so I will tell you that through the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program, they have been able to help operators learn what can they do to maybe minimize or reduce the amount of quantities they have on site, or to substitute for that, but more importantly, to provide the securities in place, the physical securities in place to protect, detect, and mitigate. I think, and specifically, and yes, we do want reauthorization. We've been pushing for that for a long time, so go reauthorization of that. At the same time, this is a black eye to that program that there was this cybersecurity breach, but the breach should not be looked at just as an issue of that program. It is a systemic issue across the government, because it's not just that group that got hit and has been successfully compromised. One thing I wanted to mention, to something you mentioned earlier, information sharing versus incident reporting. There's a difference between the two, and you will get more engagement from operators if they are invited to engage in information sharing versus incident reporting. That actually, with some cyber policies, triggers negative points for the insured if they are incident reporting versus just information sharing. And that comes from myself, who leads the Downstream Natural Gas Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
General yields back. Recognize myself now for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. McCabe, you looked like you were jumping out of your seat when Mr. Swalwell asked Mr. Kudale the question about standardization, and I wanted to let you whether the federal government should get involved or not, because insurance is usually it's a state issue. We let each state come up with their own rules, and it's governed by the state. So, what was your response to that question?
I was just leaning in to hear the answer. But I understand the issue around standardizing language. I mean, when the policies are written differently, and it's not your 9-to-5 job to review cyber insurance policies, it could be confusing one to the other. I can confirm that there's a wide amount of overlap for every cyber insurance policy. They largely cover the same thing. They largely have the same exclusions. A lot of the language is very common. The one thing about standardization that doesn't make me feel particularly good is it's still an emerging line of coverage. There's still a point of innovation where carriers are coming out and trying to figure out how they want to address the risk. They're coming up, there is a very innovative approach by one carrier where they've defined a widespread event that's going to have many of their insureds impacted. They will provide full limits for that event, but why they do it is they design their own exposure mitigation behind it. So they're thinking through what their aggregation risks are, and sometimes that language is going to be reflected in how they write the policy, and you would hate to see some kind of very regulatory effort to stymie that.
This is just a follow-up question, because if there is somehow, I know some people have said federal backstop. I'm not saying that's the answer, and I don't know how deep we want to get into that today, but if the federal government does do a backstop, and again, I'm a huge proponent of states doing insurance. I do not want us taking over, the federal government taking over any sort of insurance policy, really. But if we do have a backstop, how much, and Mr. Kudale, you could jump in on this too, how much should we be involved, though, in the issuing of policies, in the if we're gonna get involved with the money, what else should we get involved with?
Thank you for the question. I can jump on it. We had two examples today, TRIA as well as NFIP. I mean, they designed for different purposes and the involvement of government in private sector. You know, to the extent the issue private cyber insurance market has the limitations, it's really the lack in the coverage primarily into the realm of a catastrophic risk trade. And although we have new players coming into ILS and reinsurance market recently, that market is still maturing. It's not there good enough. My personal opinion is a government reinsurance facility that structured somewhat like TRIA is probably a much better aligned approach so that the government does not have to sit in as a insurer alongside other insurance like the NFIP does. Although NFIP program has an amazing risk management practices and codes, there's obviously best of the both. But most of the limitation on the primary cyber market is because of a lack of maturity into the catastrophic risk trade, really.
Any other witnesses? Mr. McCabe?
If I may, I just would resist any kind of framing that said the backstop is about what we need to do for insurance companies, because that's not true at all. So insurance policies contain a war exclusion for nation-state attacks, and they contain exclusions about disabling and disrupting critical infrastructure. And the thought is that if we're going to have this big of a catastrophic event, it's going to trigger one of these two exclusions, and the insurance carriers are not going to have to pay on those losses. That's their way of managing their exposure. What the backstop is about are the companies that are going to be left with that risk on their own books, and how is the government going to help those small and medium-sized and large businesses that are going to be impacted? It's a U.S. economic security problem.
Absolutely. And look, we've seen, Colonial Pipeline, change healthcare. We've seen these are small compared to what we're talking about today. I mean, this is and I'm going to follow up because I'm going to do a second round of questions, but we're talking about things that people aren't even expecting. And I know, Mrs. Lewis, you made the comment about we might have to go on the offense against some of and that's something Mr. Jimenez loves to talk about. I wish he was here so he could talk about it further. But yeah, this is not, people think of cyber attacks here, they think of Colonial Pipeline, think of change. That's nothing compared to what could actually happen and where this would really trigger. So I'm going to come around for a second question, but I know I'm out for this time, so I'm going to represent my friend from Mississippi, Mr. Zell, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today and discussing this, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for getting this going here. In recent years, the cyber insurance market has seen significant growth, largely driven by the rising volume of these cyber attacks. Businesses of all sizes have come to recognize the importance of cyber insurance as a crucial component of the risk management strategies. However, the absence of a standardized policy and underwriting processes apparently has created some confusion and leading to coverage limitations and high premiums. Mr. McCabe, can you briefly describe how cyber insurance varies by company and sector, including what is typically covered under a cybersecurity policy and what is not?
Sure. I would break down coverage on cyber insurance into really 3 buckets. You've had a cyber incident, and what are you going to pay out of pocket? So you're probably going to have a forensic investigation. You might have the costs associated with the cyber extortion. You might have a data breach where you have to afford credit monitoring to those who are impacted. There's probably legal expenses involved with all this. So it's those immediate incident response costs that you have to pay for as the first bucket. The second bucket, your business will be disabled for a period of time, and there might be lost revenue and extra expenses. And then the third bucket, in case there's any litigation, it would be the liability and the legal fees associated with that. That's largely what cyber insurance does. As far as what's not covered, we've talked about some of how large events will be excluded. And then, there's a very standard set of exclusions, but I think the confusion that often comes up is there'll be a claim about a cyber incident that might be put on a commercial general liability policy that's declined. And it'll say, well, cyber claim is, cyber insurance policies pay claim after claim after claim. People rely on these for those 3 buckets. They rely on them for the incident response services, and they have great benefits and incentives otherwise for improving cyber hygiene.
Thank you. What cybersecurity practices do cyber insurance providers expect companies to implement to qualify for coverage?
Yeah, there are definitely war stories in the industry associated with this. So in 2018, 2019, when ransomware really became an epidemic for companies, it was laser focused about what the controls are that are going to be most important for stymieing ransomware as a threat. And those are now mandatory, and those are things like endpoint detection and response, privilege access management to make sure that your user credentials aren't compromised, multi-factor authentication to verify that the user who's coming online is actually that person and not some threat actor. Yeah. Your patch cadence to make sure that vulnerabilities don't exist in your software. At Marsh McLennan, we aggregated the 12 most crucial controls that we ascertained through a polling of the carriers, and we put out publications to all of our insureds and to the market in general. These 12 controls are now mandatory for your coverage for ransomware, and they quickly became implemented. And prior to that, there was a very similar exercise with credit cards. Credit card breaches started happening in a big way in 2014, and quickly, we started using tokenization and chip cards, and that went away. So, there's nothing novel that the insurance industry invents. We just prioritize the standards, and we make sure those are communicated to the insureds.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Denbow, in May, this subcommittee held a hearing on private sector perspectives regarding the proposed rule to implement the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. While this rule aims to establish a standard for incident reporting, several agencies have developed their own cyber incident reporting regulations. How do entities within the gas sector view this regulatory landscape in terms of their ability to respond to a catastrophic cyber attack?
Congressman, thank you very much for that question. What you're getting to is the topic or word du jour, which is harmonization. You are hearing that everywhere. To be honest with you, it's a pipe dream. Yeah. And the reason why it is, no pun intended about pipe, but the reason why it is because one, CISA does not have the authority to incentivize the other agencies to follow suit and to follow CISA's lead. Two, the other agencies are not incentivized. They have no incentive to follow CISA's lead. And three, the problem is at the end of the day, it becomes the responsibility of the operator to make sure all of these government entities are harmonized. And so it's almost like the teenager trying to get the parents to act appropriately. And it is just not going to happen. And I speak from personal experience because at the American Gas Association, through the Oil and Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council, we intentionally tried to harmonize CFATs with the Coast Guard cybersecurity assessment plans. CFATs was totally on board, the Coast Guard was not. End of story.
Well, that's typical of the federal government. Harmony and getting things done in a timely manner, in a cooperative way. It's very hard to get things done with the federal government. Thank you very much.
And harmonization works as long as you're singing the song of whoever that agency is.
100%. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I wish we could get CFATs done, but there's a certain senator from Kentucky keeping us from getting it done, but hopefully one of these days. We're going to start our second round, and I'm going to recognize Ms. Lee from Florida for her second round of questions.
Ms. Denbow, I'd like to pick up right where you and Mr. Ezel just left off, because when we go out and talk to stakeholders and corporations and people in Washington, D.C., we hear the quest for harmonization all the time, that they suffer trying to comply with multiple and inconsistent regulatory schemes, reporting structures. So if we are to accept that true harmonization is a pipe dream, are there nonetheless things we could be doing better? Are there things that we as members of Congress could still do to try to diminish or alleviate some of that burden of those inconsistent systems?
I believe that when I say that it is a pipe dream, I mean trying to harmonize the entire government is a pipe dream. It would be great if DHS could just harmonize within its own walls. And this is why when we did this practice of CFATs with the Coast Guard, that's both DHS, it's within the same family, and we could not get that to happen. And so I think if you could start local and then go wider, that would be valuable. I think I will say that specifically for natural gas utilities, not only are we TSA, we are CFATs, we are Coast Guard, and for our combination gas and electric, we are NERC. And that doesn't count for other energy sources. And so it is a lot. And so we are wanting to be a player to help bring all of this together. This is why we keep trying to drive this. Do I have a solution for Congress on this? I'll have to go back and think harder on that. Right now, I have just been trying to figure out how we, industry, can help drive to bring government together.
And Mr. Cilluffo, did you have thoughts on that question?
Firstly, I agree with everything that has been said here, and as much as I understand it. But I do think the Office of the National Cyber Director could be a little bit of a belly button to drive at least the cyber piece. Now, my view is it should all be outcome-based. We always have these check the boxes, and everyone's going to have their own boxes they want to check. And it ends up being just a massive knot that never comes together. But if you can go to outcome-based approaches, and if you can get it, NCD, the Office of the National Cyber Director, to play the quarterback role it can play, I think we can actually make some progress. We're never going to get there 100%, but it should be outcome-based, and that's just not the way most of the approaches are right now, because it is a headache. If you're a company, you can have 15 different regulators you got to go to, so all of whom disagree. So point is I think I normally say a pessimist is an optimist with experience. I'm a little more optimistic on this one, which is nice. So I think it can move, but not on its own. It's going to have to take some pushing from industry and Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself now for 5 minutes. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors. Energy sector has a very good, they're very good at their cyber pretty well, and the financial sector has a very good cyber defense. But there are areas like the water sector that really, they could do a lot better just because there's so many different small water agencies across water utilities across the country. In 2023, Iranian-backed threat actors infiltrated a water utility in Pennsylvania, affecting about 7,000 people. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here about if they shut down the Northeast or the state of Florida or somehow shut down all the... What do we do? I mean, Mrs. Cilluffo, what's the next? What's the day after tomorrow? It's in that situation. Like, what if all of a sudden they can shut off the every water utility in New York State? What do we do next? And by the way, if water utility shutting down the water affects other critical infrastructure sectors. So what do we do? Are we prepared? And this is, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to open it up to everybody else.
First bite of the apple.
Yeah.
I'm sure others have many ideas, but firstly, you're goading me a little bit on the 16 critical infrastructures because I do feel space should have been designated a critical infrastructure. Whether it's positioning, navigation, timing, signaling, space and cyber are inextricably interwoven, and to me, it's kind of ludicrous that people haven't recognized that, but that's besides the point. In terms of the sectors themselves, if everything's critical, nothing is critical, and you're absolutely right. You've seen one water system, you've seen one water system, and in part, you'll have some that are municipalities, some that are industry, some that are state government, and the like, and that is a weak point. I think it's also, though, the committees on Capitol Hill, not to point it back to both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, but your committee has the horsepower to get things done, and the sectors that are in part there are doing some of their work. I can't say the same when you look at water in particular. When you think cyber, you're going to think what? You're going to think Homeland Security, armed services, and intelligence. That's the reality of it. So part of it, I think, is you've got a little bit of a disconnect between both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue on that one. And I really do think there is the public safety concerns around water are massive, and the resources aren't.
Anybody else?
Policy without resources is rhetoric.
Yes.
Sorry, had to throw that in there.
Anybody else want to jump in on that? Or?
If I may, Congressman, there's a lot to protect, and we have to get it right 100% of the time, and they just have to get it right once, and I'm talking about the adversary. Mm-hmm. And so trying to protect everything 100% of the time makes absolutely no possible sense for anyone. And so this is why we at the American Gas Association, natural gas utilities, and the oil and natural gas subsector, we're driving risk-based approach because this way the most critical operations are the ones that are getting the immediate attention. And then once those are secured, then we pay attention to the small and medium enterprise because, again, they are so critical to us as well, just at a different level. And so we almost, without having it written in this way, there's a tiering where we expect the large utilities to help the small utilities and bringing them along.
Thank you. All right, Mr. McCabe, I do want to ask you a question. One of the aspects of cyber insurability is developing robust cyber hygiene that helps both deterrence and recovery from cyber attacks. Accumulation of vulnerabilities and the growing number of threat vectors and actors require ever-increasing vigilance. What lessons has the insurance industry learned about resilience efforts and risk management strategies?
So thank you very much for the question. I would reiterate the point around for when there was credit card breaches of actually the cyber insurance renewals, pushing those standards onto industry, the retail industry, for ransomware, how there was responding with the 12 critical controls, and this has taken effect. So just to throw some stats out at you, in 2023, 77% of companies declined to pay the ransoms for Marsh clients. That is way up from 2021, where only 37% of our clients with ransomware claims had declined to pay them. So that's showing a much greater cyber hygiene evolving. A lot of it has to do with, are you segmenting your backup data? Are you keeping immutable backup data? Are you doing best practices? I think what the trick about cybersecurity is constant assessment. There's always a changing landscape of the attack. It's always a matter of looking for new threat intelligence, seeing how the threat actors are behaving, and being able to adapt to that. And I think with the continuous monitoring that's really becoming more prevalent within our industry, we have the opportunity to feed more information to insureds, especially small and mid-sized businesses. And I think for incident response services, those will always be important.
Thank you very much. Out of time, I'm going to yield now to the ranking member. Well, I'll let you go, and then I'm going to. No, it's fine. You'll go to you, and then I'll finish with them. That's fine. Ranking member, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to talk about the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. Ms. Denbow, I know you brought it up. I think others have brought it up as well. And can we first talk, Ms. Denbow, about your experience with the JCDC and how its work has helped drive resilience in the pipeline sector?
Thank you, Ranking Member. So I will tell you that my first encounter with the JCDC, they met with the Oil and Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council, and they came in and they had this grand plan of what they were going to do. And by the end of the hour, they had realized that they had completely missed the mark. And the Oil and Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council is not a very quiet council, and so we made it very clear to them that we're not going to play because what they plan on doing is going to waste everyone's time. So they came back and they sat and they listened. And out of that came probably one of the most functional and effective tools and engagements that the pipeline sector could have with the federal government from a voluntary perspective. They came out with a pipeline reference architecture overview where they convened not only government with the industry, the private sector, owners and operators, but also with the vendors. And that was where they said, why don't you just do this with the vendors? And we said, we cannot because of antitrust reasons. They found a solution and they addressed that and they brought us all together and they came up with tools that we all worked on, tools, a network diagram and principles that could then be publicly available to help others. So that is an example of where coming together to find out what are the fences and the hurdles that are in the way, bringing those down because that we need the government to do that so that we can all come together and get the solutions.
Great, I appreciate that, and that's what we hope it is and how it operates, and you just animated that, and that's incredibly helpful. But of course, like any government agency, it's not perfect, and I'd be interested, Mr. Cilluffo, pronounce that for me again? Cilluffo.
I've been called whatever it is worse. Frank is great, so.
I have concerns that you risk with JCDC, without having more structure and scaffolding, that it is only a collection of the people that its directors know best. And we are fortunate that the past two directors, Mr. Krebs and Ms. Easterly, have been dynamic. However, say you have a director who brings one skill, but like their network or their relationships is not necessarily their best skill, and they're not able to as quickly stand up membership into JCDC. And so I'm hoping that, and I'd like to do it in a bipartisan way, we could put together membership criteria, so to speak, and also exit criteria. In the event that you have a member who is not faithful or not participating. The one complaint I hear from people who are not in JCDC is, we don't know how the hell you get in. It's not clear how you get into it. The complaint I hear the most from people who are in it is that while it is supposed to be a two-way sharing exercise of intelligence, it too often feels like it's one way of private sector to CISA and not enough the other way. And so I was hoping you could just speak to any efforts, to, as I said, formalize JCDC in a way that has structure and scaffolding and more transparency about who's in, who's out, what's shared, what's not.
Congressman Swalwell, I think you bring up a number of very important and valid points. And as with anything, it needs to move from individuals to institutions and personalities to processes. And I think you're spot on there. Criteria is essential. And the concern I have is also small, medium-sized, but other entities that don't have an appropriate way to plug into all of this should still be beneficiaries, especially if there are any tax dollars thrown to some of those issues. So I think you're spot on with looking at what some of that criteria can look like. And I mentioned it briefly earlier, JCDC does work well when they have something to galvanize around. It's what do they do on every other day when something isn't going boom? That's what we've got to figure out. And that is what I think you're not going to work well together when something goes boom if you're exchanging business cards when the bomb goes off. It's just not the way it works. It takes time, it takes trust, it takes fighting the same fight. So I do think with any collaborative entity with the federal government, there are two things. First, you need trust. Secondly, there can't be free riders. There's a lot of that where sometimes industry just wants to be, what you put into it will be directly applicable to what you get out of it. And the reality is when it comes to JCDC, I think it's early. For transparency, this was a Solarium Commission recommendation, so I'm biased toward it, and we had the worst acronyms. We had good outcomes in terms of legislative success, but we called it JICPO and JCE, the Joint Cyber Environment, and the Joint Cyber Planning Office, so bad acronyms. But the points that you raise, I think, will help it mature, and quite honestly, are probably normal in terms of where its trajectory is.
Thank you. I yield back.
Yields back. They just called votes for us, but I know attendance is a little sparse today, so I'm going to let each one of you. I'll start with Mr. Kudale before we end. This is a very important hearing. I think this is the first time cyber insurance has been discussed in depth at any hearing on the House side. I don't know if they've done it on the Senate side. So I'm going to have each one of you another minute just to. Something that if there was something you wanted to get on the record that you didn't get to say today, and believe me, there's going to be a lot of questions that we're going to submit after this for you all to respond to, but I want to give you all at least another opportunity, a minute each, to just put something on the record that you wanted to get on that you haven't been able to get on yet. Yeah.
Chairman Garbarino and Ranking Member Sawell, thank you for having me here. I do want to just spend maybe 20 seconds addressing your previous question regarding lessons learned, and I think it would be missed for me if I don't state that for the record. First and foremost, cybercrime, no one's immune to that. In a supply chain, connectivity and interdependency, someone else's cyber problem could be my problem as an SME. And I think that's the biggest learning, that no one is immune, especially our SME community. That's number one. Number two, our learning is from SMEs, if they didn't have a cyber insurance in place, it would have been really hard for them to navigate the incident that took place. And it would have been business-ending event for them. So that's the second top. The third lesson that we learned big time is all the component that some of the witnesses mentioned here with respect to forensics, incident response, breach counsel, risk engineering, these services, SMEs don't get it on their own. And this is where, so we believe that, and also my opinion, is cyber insurers can play an amazing role in helping risk mitigation for the businesses, the 80% that are uninsured today. And so that would be the last point I would make, and I really appreciate you having me here.
Great, I appreciate it. I agree with you about that. Ms. Denbow?
Just as there is a role for practical regulations, reasonable regulations, there is a role for quality cyber insurance to not just help provide the financial backstop for someone, for an organization, but to help that organization get better at what it's doing so that it can actually qualify for the insurance. So there's many aspects to be looking at when it comes to cyber insurance and how we can use that as a tool to leverage to help organizations become better, owner-operators become better at just simple cyber hygiene. I think that that's where we want to be headed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McCabe?
Thank you very much. I think I would just emphasize that cyber insurance is truly a critical component for organizations in their risk management strategy. Every now and again, you hear a voice come out of a policymaker that'll say, gee, if it wasn't for cyber insurance, ransomware actors wouldn't be quite so active at this point, and you're encouraging it. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, cyber insurance really provides the tools for companies to get better. It's the incentives for organization to get better. It's the education for organizations to get better. And we're interested in partnership. We're interested in distributing threat intelligence information and working with the government and finding solutions.
Thank you very much. And Mrs. Cilluffo?
I'll be very brief. Never had an unspoken thought. But bottom line is outcome-based. I'm a big believer in market forces, but where they do fall short, that's where we titrate and we get that partnership going together. Because truth is companies didn't think they had to defend themselves against the PLA and the SVR, and we do need to get our arms around what that looks like, and ultimately build the business case. So try to unleash the strengths and get it done.
I appreciate it. I thank all the witnesses for your valuable testimony today and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee will have additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.